In the summer of the year 62, a line of runners left the slopes of the Apennine Mountains north of Rome, sprinting downhill in relay, each one carrying a packed bundle of snow on his back. They ran through the night so the snow would not melt in the heat of the day. When they reached the imperial kitchens, servants took what was left of it, mixed it with honey and fruit pulp and wine, and carried it on silver trays to the table of the Emperor Nero. He ate frozen dessert while most of his empire had never tasted anything cold in the middle of summer in their entire lives. That snow had traveled dozens of miles on human backs. Men had been paid and possibly worked to exhaustion so that one man could enjoy something sweet and cold for a few minutes before it turned to liquid in the Roman heat. It was one of the most extravagant luxuries in the ancient world. A frozen treat was not food. It was a display of raw power, a way of saying that you could bend even the seasons to your will. That was Rome, nearly 2,000 years ago. But the thing we would recognize as ice cream, the cold, sweet, creamy spoonful sitting in a bowl or stacked on a cone, took another 18 centuries to arrive. And the road it traveled to get from an emperor's table to the freezer aisle of every supermarket on earth runs through Chinese palaces, Arab chemistry, an Italian architect, a Philadelphia housewife, a World's Fair, and one of the strangest booms in American history. The story of ice cream is really the story of a single problem that took humanity thousands of years to solve. How do you make something cold when the world around you is warm? Everything else, the flavor, the sugar, the cream, was easy by comparison. The cold was the hard part, and whoever controlled the cold controlled a luxury that kings would pay almost anything for. Let us go back to the beginning. The first people to eat frozen desserts did not make the cold. They found it. High in the mountains, snow and ice survived long after the valleys below had turned green and warm. Anyone who could carry that ice down before it melted was holding something close to treasure. Along the Euphrates River, in what is now Iraq, nobles were building icehouses as far back as 4,000 years before the Common Era. These were pits and insulated structures where winter ice could be packed away and preserved into the burning heat of a Mesopotamian summer. The ice itself was not eaten so much as used to chill wine and cool the air, but the principle was already there. Save the cold, guard it, spend it like money. In ancient Greece, vendors sold snow in the markets of Athens in the 5th century before the Common Era. People flavored it with honey and fruit. It was refreshing, it was expensive, and it was gone the moment the sun touched it. But the real ancestor of ice cream, the frozen dairy part, came from somewhere else entirely. It came from China. As early as 200 years before the Common Era, there are references to people in China eating a frozen mixture of milk and rice, packed into snow until it set solid. This was not a casual thing. Ice was collected from rivers and mountains during winter and stored in deep underground cellars lined with straw and wood so that it could survive until summer. Ice in the ancient Chinese capital could cost as much as gold during the hottest months of the year. And then, during the Tang Dynasty, which ruled China from the year 618 to 907, something remarkable happened in the imperial kitchens. Palace chefs created a dish called sushan. They took cream skimmed from the milk of goats and water buffalo, the fatty top layer left over from cheese-making, and they combined it with flour and with camphor, an intensely aromatic substance derived from tree bark. Then they froze it and shaped it, sometimes into the form of little mountains, and served it to the emperor and his court. This was, in a real sense, the world's first premium ice cream, a frozen, sweetened, flavored dairy dessert made more than 1,000 years ago, reserved entirely for royalty. A Tang poet described it as having a texture caught between solid and liquid, something that melted the instant it touched the tongue. There are even murals painted on the walls of a Tang prince's tomb showing servants presenting these frozen delicacies to their master. One Tang emperor reportedly kept a staff of 94 men whose entire job was ice, harvesting it, storing it, and turning it into frozen desserts. Think about that for a moment. 94 people employed year-round so that one man could have something cold and sweet whenever he wanted it. That is the scale of luxury we are talking about. Ice cream, at its origin, was not a dessert. It was a symbol of an emperor's absolute command over nature. Now, there is a famous legend attached to all of this. The story goes that the explorer Marco Polo tasted these frozen treats in China in the 13th century and carried the recipe back to Italy, and that this is how ice cream reached Europe. It is a wonderful story. It is also almost certainly not true. Historians have found no real evidence that Marco Polo smuggled a frozen dessert recipe out of the Far East. The tale seems to have been invented much later, but the fact that the legend exists at all tells you how badly Europeans wanted to claim a connection to those ancient Chinese chefs who had figured it out first. Because while China had mastered the frozen dessert, one crucial secret still had not been unlocked. Everyone so far, the Romans, the Greeks, the Chinese, depended on natural ice and snow. You could only make these treats if you happened to have a mountain nearby or a cellar full of winter ice. The cold was borrowed. Nobody had learned how to create it. That breakthrough would change everything. Somewhere along the way, and the exact time and place is genuinely lost to history, someone discovered a piece of chemistry that would unlock the entire future of ice cream. If you take ordinary ice and mix salt into it, something strange and counterintuitive happens. The ice does not just melt faster. The whole mixture gets dramatically colder than plain ice ever could on its own. Salt lowers the freezing point of water, and in doing so, it pulls the temperature of the surrounding slush far below the point where water normally freezes. With the right mixture of ice and salt, you can drive the temperature down well below zero. This is called an endothermic reaction, though, of course, nobody used that word for most of history. What it meant in practice was revolutionary. For the first time, you did not need a bitter, cold winter or a mountain peak to freeze something. You could take a container of sweetened cream, nestle it inside a bucket packed with ice and salt, stir it, and watch it freeze right in front of you in the middle of summer, in a warm kitchen. This single discovery is the hinge on which the entire history of ice cream turns. The Arab world, during its golden age of science between roughly the 8th and 13th centuries, played an enormous role here. Arab chemists and cooks were pioneers in refining sugar and in the techniques of chilling and freezing. They created sharbat, sweet syrupy drinks chilled with ice and snow, flavored with fruit and rosewater, the distant ancestor of both sherbet and sorbet. The very words sherbet and syrup come to us from Arabic. Knowledge of the salt and ice freezing technique spread slowly across the Mediterranean world. By the time it reached the kitchens of Renaissance Italy, the pieces were finally in place. The cream, the sugar, the flavor, and now, crucially, a reliable way to make cold on demand. What happened next turned a scattered set of ancient techniques into something that looked, for the first time, like modern ice cream. And it happened at one of the most glittering courts in Europe. In the city of Florence, in the second half of the 16th century, there lived a man named Bernardo Buontalenti. He was, by any measure, a genius of the overachieving Renaissance kind. He was an architect. He designed fortifications and buildings and elaborate stage machinery. He engineered spectacular fireworks displays. He built grottos and gardens. And he worked in the service of the Medici, the immensely wealthy banking family that effectively ruled Florence and bankrolled much of the Renaissance. For a lavish banquet meant to impress visiting Spanish dignitaries, Buontalenti was asked to create something extraordinary. Drawing on his knowledge of engineering and his understanding of how to keep things cold, he is said to have produced a frozen dessert unlike anything the guests had seen. A rich, smooth, sweetened cream, frozen using ice and salt, flavored delicately, and presented as the crowning marvel of the feast. This is widely regarded as one of the founding moments of gelato, the Italian frozen dessert that is the direct ancestor of modern ice cream. Buontalenti is still celebrated in Florence today. There is a classic gelato flavor named after him, a creamy custard base of milk, cream, egg yolks, and a hint of citrus and vanilla. The architect who designed fortresses for the Medici also, in the popular telling, helped design the dessert that would eventually conquer the world. Now, as with every origin in this story, the details are debated. Frozen desserts were appearing in several Italian courts around the same time, and no single person deserves all the credit. But the direction of travel is clear. In the courts of Renaissance Italy, frozen cream went from an occasional curiosity to a refined art form. Italian chefs became the acknowledged masters of it, and then it followed the money and the marriages of European royalty across the continent. When Catherine de' Medici, a daughter of the Florentine dynasty, left Italy to become Queen of France in the 16th century, legend says she brought Italian frozen desserts and the chefs who made them to the French court. Like the Marco Polo story, this one is probably more myth than fact. But once again, the myth captures a real truth. Italian ice-making expertise genuinely did spread outward from Italy into France and beyond, carried by chefs, by trade, and by the relentless appetite of aristocrats for the newest luxury. By the 1600s, frozen desserts were appearing at royal banquets across Europe, in Paris, in Naples, in Spain, in England. In the year 1671, at a feast at the English court, King Charles II was served, according to the records of the day, a single plate of ice cream. Just one plate, and it went to the king. Everyone else at the table went without. That detail says everything about where ice cream stood at that moment in history. It was so rare and so precious that even at a royal banquet, there might only be enough for the monarch himself. In the year 1686, a Sicilian named Francesco Procopio dei Coltelli opened a cafe in Paris. It would become the famous Café Procope, and it helped introduce frozen desserts to a broader public of wealthy Parisians. And in the year 1768, a French cookbook appeared devoted entirely to the making of flavored ices and ice creams. The knowledge was being written down, codified, and shared. But it was still knowledge for the elite. Making ice cream in this era was brutally laborious. You needed access to stored ice, which was expensive. You needed sugar, which was expensive. You needed cream and time and skilled hands to stir the mixture endlessly by hand in a pot surrounded by ice and salt, scraping the frozen bits off the side over and over for hours until it finally set into something smooth. Ice cream, in other words, was still a rich person's pleasure. It had crossed from China to Rome to Italy to France to England, and everywhere it went, it remained the same thing it had always been. A luxury of kings and courts, the dessert that proved you were somebody. That was about to change, and it was going to change in a brand new country across the ocean. Ice cream arrived in the American colonies with European settlers, and the first recorded mention is charming in its specificity. In the year 1744, a Scottish colonist named William Black attended a dinner party hosted by the wife of the colonial governor of Maryland. Afterward, he wrote about the meal, and he singled out one dish in particular. A frozen cream, he said, served with strawberries, that he found remarkable and delicious. That is the first written record of someone eating ice cream in what would become the United States. From the beginning, ice cream in America was tangled up with the most famous names of the founding era. George Washington was, to put it mildly, a serious enthusiast. In the summer of the year 1790, a New York merchant's records show that Washington spent around $200 on ice cream in a single season. $200 in 1790 was an enormous sum, the equivalent of many thousands of dollars today. Washington owned special pewter pots for making it and served it regularly at his presidential dinners. He was, if not an addict, then certainly a devoted customer. Thomas Jefferson was even more deeply involved. During his years in France, Jefferson developed a refined taste for French cuisine, and he brought home with him a handwritten recipe for vanilla ice cream. That recipe, in Jefferson's own hand, still survives today, preserved in the Library of Congress. It calls for egg yolks, sugar, and heavy cream, a rich custard base, the same fundamental formula that defines premium American ice cream to this day. Jefferson also brought back a machine for making it and served ice cream at the president's house. Dolly Madison, the wife of President James Madison and one of the great hostesses of early Washington, made ice cream a fixture of high society, famously serving it at grand events during her husband's presidency. But here is the part of the American story that too often gets left out. Some of the most important early innovation in American ice cream came from black confectioners, working in a country that still enslaved millions of black people. Around the year 1832, a man named Augustus Jackson was working in Philadelphia. Jackson had spent time as a cook in the White House kitchens in Washington in the 1820s. After leaving, he set himself up in Philadelphia as a confectioner and caterer, and he became extraordinarily good at making ice cream. Jackson developed superior techniques for controlling the freezing process and created a whole range of new flavors. He figured out how to package his ice cream in tin cans and distribute it to ice cream parlors across the city. He built a thriving, successful business and became, by some accounts, one of the wealthiest black businessmen in Philadelphia. Today, he is sometimes called the father of ice cream, and while that title is generous given the dessert's long global history, his contribution to the American industry was very real. There is also a persistent oral tradition in the free black community of Wilmington, Delaware, that a woman known as Aunt Sally Shadd created an early and celebrated form of ice cream in the late 17 or early 1800s. The historical record is thin, as it so often is, for enslaved and free black Americans of that era whose achievements went undocumented. But the tradition survives, and it is part of this story. Still, for all these famous names and talented makers, ice cream in America in the early 1800s was fundamentally the same luxury it had been in ancient Rome. It required stored ice, skilled labor, and hours of exhausting hand-stirring. Only the wealthy could serve it. Only the wealthy could afford it. For most Americans, ice cream was something you might taste once or twice in your life if you were lucky. The thing that finally broke that barrier, the invention that took ice cream out of the palace and put it into the hands of ordinary people, came from a source that 19th century America would never have expected. A housewife, working alone, who did something that women of her time were barely even allowed to do. Her name was Nancy Johnson. She was born Nancy Maria Donaldson in the state of New York in the year 1794, and she lived in an America where married women had almost no legal rights of their own. Under the legal doctrine called coverture, a married woman's property, her income, and even her legal identity effectively passed into the control of her husband. Women were widely considered dependents, incapable of managing their own finances or signing their own contracts. And yet, in the year 1843, while living in Philadelphia, Nancy Johnson did something remarkable. She invented a machine, and she filed a patent for it in her own name. The patent was granted on the 9th of September, 1843. She called it the artificial freezer. Her invention was elegant and simple, and it solved the single biggest problem in ice cream making. Before Johnson, the standard method was the pot freezer. You put your cream mixture in a metal pot, set the pot in a tub of ice and salt, and then you stirred endlessly by hand, opening the lid again and again, scraping the frozen cream off the sides so it would blend evenly. It was slow, it was exhausting, and it usually produced a lumpy, uneven result. Nancy Johnson's machine changed all of that. She placed a metal cylinder inside a wooden tub, packed the space between them with ice and salt, and then, crucially, she put a set of curved paddles called a dasher inside the cylinder, attached to a crank on the outside. Now, instead of opening the container and stirring by hand, you simply turned the crank. The dasher rotated continuously, scraping the freezing cream off the walls and folding it back into the center, exposing fresh mixture to the cold again and again, all with the lid sealed shut. The result was ice cream that was smoother, creamier, and more consistent than almost anything the old method could produce, and it took a fraction of the effort. A family could make good ice cream at home, in their own kitchen, without a staff of servants. This was the breakthrough. This was the moment ice cream started to become a food for everyone. Nancy Johnson, however, did not get rich from it. She could not afford to manufacture the machine herself, so she sold her patent to a businessman named William Young for $200. Young, to his credit, did the honorable thing and named the product after her. He marketed it as the Johnson Patent Ice Cream Freezer. In the 25 years after she filed her patent, something like 90 more patents for ice cream machines were filed, most of them building directly on her design. The fundamental principle she invented, a rotating dasher inside a cylinder, chilled by ice and salt, is still the basic mechanism at the heart of every ice cream machine made today, right down to the electric ones on kitchen counters and the industrial ones in factories. A woman who was not legally allowed to fully control her own money, in a country that barely recognized her as an independent person, invented the device that turned ice cream from an aristocratic luxury into an everyday treat. And for most of history, her name was left out of the story entirely. With the hard part finally solved, ice cream was ready to explode. And one man was about to turn Nancy Johnson's home invention into an industry. In the year 1851, a milk dealer in Baltimore named Jacob Fussell found himself with a problem that turned out to be an opportunity. Fussell bought fresh cream from dairy farms in Pennsylvania and sold it in the city. But the demand for cream was unpredictable, and he kept ending up with a large surplus that would spoil before he could sell it. Rather than throw it away, Fussell had an idea. He would turn the excess cream into ice cream. It worked so well that Fussell soon realized the ice cream was more profitable than the milk. He opened what is generally considered the first commercial ice cream factory in the United States, producing ice cream in bulk and shipping it out by rail. Because he was working at scale, using surplus cream, he could sell his ice cream far more cheaply than anyone else. The price dropped dramatically, and ordinary working families could suddenly afford it. Fussell opened more factories in more cities and taught others to do the same. He is remembered today as the father of the American wholesale ice cream industry. Then the machines of the industrial age finished the job. In the late 19th century, a German engineer named Carl von Linde developed practical mechanical refrigeration. This was monumental. For the first time in human history, you no longer needed to harvest and store natural ice at all. You could create cold, reliably, mechanically, whenever you wanted it, in any season, in any climate. The ancient problem that had defined ice cream for 4,000 years, the problem of finding and hoarding the cold, was finally and permanently solved by a machine. Steam power, electricity, mechanical refrigeration, and new inventions like the homogenizer came together in the late 1800s and early 1900s to make ice cream a true mass-produced product. Factories churned out enormous quantities. Refrigerated rail cars and later trucks carried it across the country. Brands like Borden and Breyers and Hood became household names. What had been the food of emperors was now stacked in cold storage, waiting to be sold by the scoop on any street corner. And it was on those street corners, in the drugstores and soda fountains of America, that ice cream took on the forms we still recognize and love today. The soda fountain became a fixture of American life in the second half of the 19th century. In the year 1874, a Philadelphia vendor combined ice cream with carbonated soda water and flavored syrup and created the ice cream soda. It was an instant sensation. Young people crowded into drugstores to drink them. The soda fountain became a social hub, a place to meet, to court, to gossip, to be seen. But the ice cream soda ran into an unexpected obstacle, and that obstacle gave birth to one of America's most beloved desserts. In many American towns in the late 1800s, there were laws on the books called blue laws. These were religious restrictions that banned certain activities on Sundays, the Christian day of rest. In a number of places, blue laws or local pressure targeted the ice cream soda specifically. To some strict religious leaders, the fizzy, indulgent, frivolous ice cream soda was exactly the kind of sinful pleasure that had no business being sold on the Sabbath. So enterprising soda fountain owners found a clever workaround. If the soda was the problem, they would simply leave out the soda. They took the ice cream, poured flavored syrup over the top, added a few toppings, and served it without any carbonation. No soda, no violation. This syrup-topped ice cream dish, invented or at least popularized to dodge the Sunday restrictions, took its name from the very day it was meant to get around. It was called a Sunday. And then, according to the most popular explanation, the spelling was changed to Sundae, partly to avoid the religious association with the holy day. Now, the true origin of the Sunday is fiercely disputed. At least 4 different American towns claim to be its birthplace, including Two Rivers in Wisconsin, Ithaca in New York, and others. Each has its own story and its own local hero. The rivalry between them is genuinely intense, and it has never been fully settled. Ithaca has a strong claim backed by an early trademark filing. But whatever the precise details, the Sundae emerged in the 1880s, and it became a permanent, glorious fixture of the American dessert menu. Then came the cone, and the story of the cone is one of the most famous happy accidents in food history. The setting was the World's Fair in St. Louis, Missouri, in the year 1904. This particular fair has a legendary reputation for popularizing American foods. As the story goes, an ice cream vendor at the fair was doing a roaring business on a hot day, and he ran out of the paper or cardboard dishes he was serving his ice cream in. Right next to him was a vendor selling a thin, crisp Middle Eastern waffle-like pastry. The two of them teamed up. The waffle vendor rolled his warm pastries into cones. The ice cream vendor scooped his product on top, and the ice cream cone was born. Now, in the interest of honesty, that tidy story is not the whole truth. Edible ice cream cones and the idea of serving ice cream in a rolled wafer had appeared in Europe well before 1904. A cone actually shows up in a British cookbook written by a woman named Agnes Marshall back in the 1880s. So the 1904 World's Fair did not truly invent the cone. But there is no doubt that the fair took the cone and blasted it into mainstream American popularity. Millions of people encountered it there, loved it, and carried the idea home. After 1904, the cone was everywhere. Agnes Marshall herself deserves a moment here, because she was a giant of ice cream history who is too often forgotten. Working in London in the late 1800s, Marshall was known as the Queen of Ices. She ran a hugely successful cooking school, wrote best-selling cookbooks full of ice cream recipes, patented her own ice cream machine that could freeze a batch in minutes, and published her own magazine. She even wrote remarkably about the theoretical possibility of using liquefied gas to freeze ice cream instantly at the table, an idea that pointed directly toward the liquid nitrogen ice cream that is a trendy novelty today, more than a century later. She was decades ahead of her time. By the early 1900s then, all the pieces of the ice cream we know were in place. The smooth, creamy product, the factories, the parlors, the soda, the sundae, the cone. Ice cream had completed its long journey from the emperor's table to the corner drugstore. And then something almost unbelievable happened. A law that had nothing to do with ice cream sent its popularity soaring to heights no one could have predicted. In the year 1920, the United States banned alcohol. The National Prohibition Act, enforcing the 18th Amendment, made it illegal to produce, sell, or transport alcoholic beverages across the entire country. Thousands upon thousands of bars and saloons were forced to close their doors. An enormous social void opened up. Americans had lost their gathering places, the spots where people went to relax, to socialize, to unwind after work. And into that void poured ice cream. With bars shuttered, the soda fountain became the new social center of American towns. People who once would have met for a drink now met for a sundae or an ice cream soda. Soda fountains experienced an absolute golden age. Ice cream consumption in America surged. Some breweries, unable to make beer legally, actually converted their facilities to manufacture ice cream instead, keeping their businesses alive by pivoting from one indulgence to another. It is one of the great ironies of American history. A law meant to make the country more sober and austere instead triggered one of the biggest booms the ice cream industry has ever seen. This same era gave birth to a wave of iconic frozen novelties. In the year 1920, a candy maker named Christian Nelson created a bar of vanilla ice cream coated in a shell of chocolate. He first called it the Ice Cream Bar, and then renamed it the Eskimo Pie, and it became a national sensation. Soon after came imitators and rivals like the Klondike Bar. A man named Harry Burt put chocolate-coated ice cream bars on wooden sticks, called them Good Humor Bars, and sent out a fleet of uniformed salesmen in white trucks to sell them through the streets. The Good Humor Man became an American icon, the jingling truck, a sound that meant summer to generations of children. The popsicle was patented in the year 1923, reportedly the accidental invention of a boy who had left a cup of flavored soda outside overnight with the stirring stick still in it. The frozen treat had become woven into the fabric of everyday American life, and when the country faced its greatest trial, ice cream would be there too, this time as a weapon of morale. During the Second World War, ice cream became something more than a dessert. It became a symbol of home, of comfort, and of the American way of life that soldiers were fighting for. The United States military understood this completely and leaned into it hard. Ice cream was treated as essential for troop morale. By the year 1943, the single largest producer of ice cream in the entire United States was not a company at all. It was the United States Armed Forces. The military poured resources into making sure its troops had ice cream. The Navy went so far as to commission a floating ice cream factory, a concrete barge that could produce enormous quantities of ice cream and be towed around the Pacific to resupply ships and island bases. Fighter pilots discovered they could freeze ice cream mix by strapping it into their aircraft and flying to high altitude, where the freezing air did the work. Wherever American troops went, ice cream followed, because commanders knew what it did for the spirits of exhausted, homesick, frightened young men. The symbolism was so powerful that it worked in reverse on the other side. In Italy, the fascist dictator Benito Mussolini is said to have taken a dim view of ice cream, associating its cheerful, casual, democratic appeal with the America he opposed. The precise truth of any outright ban is debated by historians, but the association itself is telling. Ice cream had become so thoroughly identified with America and its values that a dictator could see it as a small cultural threat. A frozen dessert had become a piece of national identity. When the war ended and the soldiers came home, they brought that deep emotional attachment to ice cream with them. The post-war years, the 1940s and 50s, became a nostalgic golden age of American ice cream. Soda fountains and ice cream parlors flourished. Suburban families piled into cars and drove to roadside ice cream stands. And a new form of the treat was taking over those roadsides, one that was softer, cheaper, and served a different way. Around the late 1930s and into the 1940s, soft-serve ice cream was perfected. Soft serve is made by whipping more air into the mixture and serving it at a slightly warmer, softer consistency, straight from a machine through a spigot, curling down into a cone on demand. It was faster to serve, it used less actual cream, and it was cheaper to sell. Both the Dairy Queen Company and the Carvel Company claim to have pioneered soft serve in the mid-1930s. Dairy Queen began as a single roadside store in Joliet, Illinois, in the year 1940, and grew into a nationwide franchise empire. These soft-serve chains, along with Tasty Freeze and others, spread across the American landscape, their signs and swirl-topped cones becoming part of the scenery of the open road. Meanwhile, the sit-down ice cream business turned flavor itself into a competition. In the post-war era, vendors battled to offer more variety than anyone else. One chain advertised a world of 28 flavors. Then along came Baskin-Robbins, which built its entire brand around the promise of 31 flavors, one for every single day of the month. It was a marketing masterstroke. Over the years, the company would go on to develop more than 1,000 different flavors. Ice cream had become a canvas for endless creativity. Then, in the late 1950s and beyond, the market split in a fascinating way. At one end, a new category appeared, the super premium ice cream. Dense, rich, intensely creamy, made with high butter fat and minimal air, sold at a premium price. A brand called Häagen-Dazs was launched in the United States in the year 1960 with an invented, foreign-sounding name designed to suggest old-world craftsmanship, even though it was created in the Bronx in New York City. Then, in the year 1978, two friends named Ben Cohen and Jerry Greenfield opened a scoop shop in a converted gas station in Burlington, Vermont. Ben and Jerry's built a beloved brand on chunky, indulgent, playfully named flavors and a distinctive social conscience, and became one of the most famous ice cream companies in the world. At the very same time, in pulling in the opposite direction, health-conscious consumers drove a boom in frozen yogurt. Introduced as a lighter, Tangier alternative in the 1970s, ice cream had become so central to the culture that it was now being pulled apart into opposite extremes, the richest possible indulgence on one side and the guilt-free alternative on the other, each with its own devoted following. Today, ice cream is a truly global industry worth well over $100 billion a year. It is made and eaten on every inhabited continent. It has genuinely reached every corner of the earth, including Antarctica, where a soft-serve machine at a research station serves scientists at the bottom of the world. A craft revolution has brought artisanal scoop shops offering flavors that would have baffled earlier generations: lavender and honey, sea salt and caramel, spicy chili chocolate. Dairy-free and vegan versions made from oats, coconut, and almonds have opened the treat to people who cannot or choose not to eat dairy. And that century-old idea of Agnes Marshall's has come to life in shops where liquid nitrogen freezes custom ice cream in a dramatic cloud of fog right before your eyes. Think about the journey this dessert has taken. It began as snow carried down a mountain on the backs of running men so that a Roman emperor could taste something cold in the summer heat. It was refined in the palaces of Tang China by chefs skimming cream for their emperor, guarded by 94 men whose only job was ice. It became an art in the courts of Renaissance Italy, a marvel dreamed up by an architect for the Medici. For thousands of years, through every one of those chapters, ice cream meant exactly one thing: power. The power to command the cold, to bend the seasons, to afford a luxury that almost no one else on earth could taste. For most of human history, a bowl of frozen cream was a message. It said that you were a king, an emperor, an aristocrat. It said that the ordinary rules of nature did not apply to you. And then, one piece at a time, that changed. A discovery about salt and ice. A housewife in Philadelphia with a hand crank and a patent in her own name. A milk dealer with too much cream. A German engineer who learned to manufacture cold itself. A World's Fair, a blue law, a national ban on alcohol, and a world war. Each one chipped away at the exclusivity until the dessert of emperors became something a child could buy for pocket change from a jingling truck on a summer afternoon. That is the strange and wonderful arc of ice cream. The ultimate symbol of royal power became the ultimate symbol of ordinary, democratic, everyday joy. The thing that once proved you ruled the world is now something the whole world shares. The next time you hold a cone in your hand and feel it start to melt and you race to eat it before it drips down your fingers, remember that you are experiencing the exact same fleeting pleasure that Nero chased with an army of runners, that a Tang emperor kept 94 men employed to provide, that kings once hoarded for themselves alone. You are tasting a luxury that took 4,000 years and the ingenuity of 100 forgotten inventors to place, finally in your hand. Not bad for a scoop of frozen cream. If you enjoyed this, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling us which part of ice cream's history surprised you the most.